Yesterday was kind of the end of the beginning of the Epiphany Project, and some of you have been involved in various aspects of that. We started back in August with a everybody come meeting. It was 50-some people came, and people talked about what the church had meant to them, you know, through the years. And some people my age were talking about, you know, going to camp, and others, you know, when there was a problem, the church stepped in, or, you know, some aspect of the worship or ministry or whatever. There was a man that was here that led that, and then he sent us a 60-page report called an assessment. And we looked at all aspects of our congregation, our people, our finances, our building, and what our resources were, and then looked at the demographics, and they kind of plugged into a 7-minute drive from Kings Highway. Now I know, how many of you drive more than that to get here? Most of you. Yeah. But a lot of people think about, you know, that's in easy territory to invite somebody to come if it's 7 minutes away. So we looked at the demographics and who lives in our neighborhood and all that, and you know, what are some of the needs of those people. We had a retreat in September, and we had 40-some people come to that, and we began to look at the issues of who our neighbors are and who we are, and then talked about what does it mean to move from being a leader that just kind of takes care of business as it is, you know, we just kind of keep things going as they are, or who's interested not in just doing the business, but who wants to change lives, you know, and looking for who are the people that need us, and how can we reach those people? How can we make them feel welcome here? So that was a great process, and I think a lot of people went away pretty positive. You know, moving from an idea of, you know, you're a member of the church and you pay your dues, and the church, you know, provides you spiritual leadership and all that. Looking from in terms of, you know, you pay your offerings because you want to change other people's lives, and that you are interested in being not just a member, but you want to be a follower of Christ, a disciple. So it was kind of some new ideas to think about, and it seemed to go over pretty well. We had some people do some work. Stephanie was part of a team that worked on looking at our building, and from the people who don't really usually work with property, and you know, kind of going through with new eyes. And Kathy worked on looking at a school, elementary school. It was Stoner Hill. Talked to the principal there and what kind of needs they have. We had people that went over to Bird. Let's see, Dwight, you talked to the police department and got some insights. Anyway, we have a pretty good document here. Maybe you'd like to take a look at this. It is awesome. People looked at our healthcare situation and how it relates to the church. You know, how our finances are, the reality of it. City planning. Let's see, what else? Some opportunities based on local demographics. And this was all good stuff. And then we got back together Friday night. Some of you came to that, and we heard these reports, or a summation, and you know, asked the question: what as a church do we have a passion for? And, you know, what's really important to us? What do we like to do that we have energy for? Not, you know, what do we force ourselves to do, but what do we really want to do? And then yesterday, a small group that looked about the idea of writing a future story of Kings Highway, looking at 5 years from now. What might be going on? And what we kind of focused in on, and this is not done or it's finalized or anything, but is we have a real interesting opportunity to have a great ministry to students. Number one, disciples from the get-go have always been interested in education. It's a logical approach to faith. And we had a lot of people involved in education historically in the disciples of Christ, and certainly in this congregation. An interest in children and students. We got 1,000 people over across the street here at Bird, and some of their interesting needs, and med school, and talk about ways that we might be able to offer different kind of ministries to this part of our community. Not so we can get the people in the door, but if we reach out to their needs and begin to address what's really going on with their lives, that we can help them from the standpoint of the gospel. And some of them are going to come. It's going to be attractive. If any of you would like to report, they're here, and we'll be keeping you posted. And appreciate your ideas as this unfolds. Okay. Next thing. Just join in if you know this one. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Lord was passing by, he stopped and said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm coming to your house today. I'm coming to your house today. Andy, you need to add this to the repertoire.
Oh, no, is it really?
Is that Catholic upbringing, man? They skipped it. Okay. What do you know about Zacchaeus? He was... Hey, what? He was a tax collector. He was the chief tax collector. And you remember where he lived? This is a hard question. He lived in Jericho. And we have another song, but we won't do that one. I was real interested in that clip because I always wondered about how he got up the tree. Because all the sycamore trees I've seen are big enough to climb. I mean, there's no low branches on them. It kind of showed a different kind of more bushy sycamore. Okay, so you mentioned, we knew Zacchaeus was short, and he was a tax collector, and he lived in Jericho. And he was not just a tax collector, he was a chief tax collector, which meant he owned the franchise for Jericho. And he paid the Romans money up front, so he had to be a man of means. And then it was up to him to go collect the tax, and tax collectors had a lot of freedom in terms of, what they charged people and so on. And it said that not only was he short and in Jericho and a tax collector, that he was wealthy. He was rich. So that's the background. Scripture. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it, and a man was there named Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich, and he was trying to see Jesus. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed the sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. And all who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. And then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost. Once there was a man who desperately wanted to see Jesus. Why? Well, Jesus had a bit of a reputation. He had crowds following him. And part of his reputation was he fellowshiped with people like Zacchaeus. You know, people that were outcasts. People that were looked down upon. And Zacchaeus was certainly one of those. You know, he may have had a great personality, but people hated him because of what he did for a living. And, you know, he probably had few friends and he had his money, but, you know, people didn't want to be around him probably. But he heard that Jesus, this amazing rabbi teacher, he cares for people like me. And so Zacchaeus hurried to see him. When was the last time you felt kind of desperate to encounter Jesus? Like something happened, something was missing, we had a crisis, there was just like a need to be taught or comforted or pointed in a direction, and you needed Jesus, and maybe you would even say you're desperate. But there was a crowd in the way, you know, and we're always concerned about who our kids' friends are, because we know that they have a huge impact on what the kids do and how they spend their time. You know, when they get to first grade, there's kids have a little organization that we all forgot about. We all went through it, but you must take a pledge never to tell your parents anything about school. You know, and if they ask you, you just say it's fine. Yeah. So the crowd influences us as kids, and it influences us as adults. You know, sometimes we have ideas that are different from other people, but we often keep them to ourselves because the crowd doesn't like them. Or the crowd says things that we don't agree with, or they put stuff on Facebook that we don't like, but, you know, we don't want to muddy the water. We just go along. And the crowd was in his way, but he had a creative solution. He climbed a tree. Okay, so we're thinking, well, you know, he at least was fairly young or in fairly good shape to do that. But, you know, when people in Jesus' time heard about a man climbing a tree, it's like, that's a big scandal. You know the story of the parable of the prodigal son. And the one son takes his heritage and his inheritance and runs away from home and blows it all. And then, you know, he's living in poverty and he comes back. And, you know, and so we're shocked because the father is willing to forgive the son. When people in Jesus' day heard that, what they were most shocked by was the father ran to meet the son coming back. Men did not do that. That was a taboo thing. It was undignified. And in a culture where you didn't want to shame your family, the father shamed the whole family by running. Well, so much so for a man to climb a tree like a kid. And Zacchaeus was so interested in seeing Jesus that he was willing to risk shame to get a new angle on who this person was. You know, do you want to get involved in something? Or you want to discover more about your spiritual life, but it's just, you know, I might be embarrassed. Or, you know, I'd ask a question, but I don't want people to know that I don't know the answer to that, because I feel like I should know the answer. I mean, there's just lots of ways to look at this, but here is this man willing to shame himself for his family. And Jesus passes by and sees him and says the most amazing thing, I'm coming to your house today. What an honor. I mean, Jesus is the star of the day, and he wants to come to his house. And Zacchaeus was so touched. He must have known something about Jesus, because the first thing he said was, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. Well, why did he say that? What did Jesus talk about all the time? Taking care of the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the helpless. My minister in Oklahoma a few years ago met someone in the congregation. Asked him, says, how come you talk so much about the poor? It's like, have you looked at the New Testament? I mean, she didn't say that, but have you looked at the New Testament? Do you remember anything of what Jesus talked about? This is a major emphasis of Christianity. So Zacchaeus must have known something about Jesus, and he said, you know, if I've wronged anybody, I'll pay him back 4 times, and so on like that. And then Jesus said, why, salvation has come to your house today. I mean, if you're serious enough about following me to give half your money away, wow. Well, you know, what the crowd said. This man is a sinner. We don't like this man. And why, Jesus, you would choose to go to his house when so many of us would love to invite you over for dinner at our house. And you pick this person of all the folks in Jericho? We don't get it. They were indignant. This Jesus is kind of revolutionary. And so many things he just continues to turn upside down is how we think. And finally, he says, the Son of Man, which he referred to himself as the Son of Man, I have come to seek and save the lost. Well, maybe people thought that nobody was more lost in Jericho than Zacchaeus. And that's an example. What Jesus sees in every person he encounters is something more than we ever get around to seeing in other people. It's hard not to look just at the surface. It's hard not to try to accept people that think different than us, or look different than us, or smell different than us, and we think, you know, they're different. I don't know. Jesus seems to encounter every person and sees the richness and the depth and the possibilities. We sang a hymn at the end of the first service, more about Jesus. More about Jesus I would know. And sometimes we kind of don't want to know too much about Jesus. You know, we like the forgiveness and the salvation part of it. But we maybe don't want to know too much about Jesus' ethics and his willingness to go the second, third mile, and his ability to open himself and his life to ridicule and abuse. He invites us to come to our table. that we might, in sharing these elements, know more about Jesus. And that he can look at Zacchaeus and say, today salvation has come to your house. Could he look at you and say that? Come to his table. Remember that the bread is broken for you as a follower. The cup poured out, shared for the followers. It's who we are as people. Seeking to find ways to better be a part of who Jesus is in our day. And to love in just a little bit of the depth that he did. Find strength in these things. Find in one another in this congregation. And know that you are loved.